What do you make of all this?
Well, it's great if you don't like to get phone calls. Otherwise, it's kind of lousy. So, no, this is really disappointing. I mean, you know, if you think about the way that historically software companies roll out, these are called patches, right? It's sort of minor updates to the operating system. It's the sort of thing you do all the time. Microsoft does it, Apple does it, everyone does it. But the key is to actually test the thing fairly widely before you roll it out because, you know, you're always going to run into these unusual cases. It's one thing if a couple of people have a problem, but in this particular case, you know, it seems like it was widespread. People not only couldn't make calls, they actually lost access to the Touch ID, this sort of fingerprint scanner that lets you into many apps. So this was fairly catastrophic for Apple.
So if you're Apple, what do you need to do right now?
Well, two things. One, you need to roll out, you know, they did the first thing right, which was they immediately pulled back the 8.01 release and it was no longer available. Two, you need to roll out fairly quickly an 8.02 release because you've got a bunch of people out there who can no longer use their iPhone devices. So this is really, you know, fairly awful. And three, you need to change the way that you actually test patches before you release them. It looks as if this was probably fairly narrowly tested, maybe just on the Apple campus where people are mostly using Wi-Fi and not using cell phones in particular. As calling devices, and as a result, you don't run into every scenario that people do in the real world. And this is kind of a result of Apple's secrecy policy. They don't like people to see what they're doing, but the upshot of that is that they don't always test in the widest circumstances. You can have these terrible, terrible messes like they had yesterday.
Paul, between the iOS fail and the iPhone 6 Plus, which you can almost bend in half, whose head should roll at Apple?
Right. Well, you know, I had someone suggest to me, an ex-Apple guy that I know fairly well, you know, and there's no pun intended, but he argued that Jony Ives, who's, you know, Apple's sort of guru of product design in the post-Steve Jobs era, phoned in, and this is his pun, phoned in the iPhone 6 design because he was so busy working on the new watch product. The iPhone 6 shows an awful lot of signs of having been assembled according to a bunch of specs as opposed to designed and really thought about as clearly as maybe might be the case. So I think the guy who you can point a finger to here probably is Jony Ives. His head's never going to roll. He's sort of the Svengali of design at Apple, but I think this falls on his plate. This was a crazy design choice to produce a product that you imply can fit in a pocket, and yet when you sit down has a high likelihood of bending for many people.
Can we just talk about that for a moment? I mean, you could have had me on the quality control team, and I would have been able to say, man, there's a problem here. How could something so basic that seems like anybody could catch gets missed?
Well, this is it. I mean, this goes back again to Apple's testing policies. Apple is so secretive that products often are tested in a very, very narrow circle of people before they actually see the light of day. Famously, the original iPhones were chained to boardroom tables whenever developers were looking at them. You couldn't even move it away from the boardroom table, let alone put it in your pocket to try and see how it would work for you. And so this is a problem, a long-standing problem dating back to 2007
so
for
there's
Apple
a chance no one ever even put it in there. So you're saying there's a chance no one even tested it. No one ever put it in a pocket.
Well, maybe Tim Cook, but to me, he looks like he wears pretty tight pants, so maybe they wouldn't fit in his. So maybe somebody else.
Paul.
That's news breaking right there.
This is true.
Tim
Cook's
right
tight
pants.
You heard it from Paul Kedrosky. Paul, how is this possible? Think about IKEA for a moment. You've been to those IKEA showrooms where they've got the drawers being pulled in and out by a robot, testing it, for these kinds of things. Durability, susceptibility to breakage, simple things that should occur to anybody. Yeah. How is it possible that this couldn't have occurred to Apple?
Apple doesn't need to prove to you that they're high quality. IKEA does.
Well, there you go. That's exactly right. Apple has this halo around it that says it all just works, right? But then, it really is this secrecy policy. Whenever you have this view that everyone in the world isn't allowed, a very, very narrow list of people, short list of people are actually allowed to see products pre-release and test them in the real world, you end up with this, really kind of, I don't know, almost genetically, constrained set of people who are using them so that they're all using for the same things on the same campus at Apple in Cupertino. And as a result, you don't really get a representative set of what people use these things for in the real world. And so, no one's taking it to a wedding and sitting down for 2 hours and listening to speeches and taking it out of their pocket and saying, oh my goodness, my phone is bent. Because you're not allowed to take it off the Apple campus, and it's even a small list of people there. So I think this really speaks to how Apple has to change. Apple's going to have to become more open about how it tests products, whether it's software, like the iOS release yesterday, or hardware. And that's just runs contrary to their DNA.
Wow, there you go. Aren't you, I mean, but just for a second, aren't you amazed that this happened?
I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it yesterday when I saw this. I mean, it was a complete fiasco. I've never seen, even Microsoft, who gets beaten up regularly for releasing software that doesn't work, has never released a release of their operating system that immediately shut down people's computers around the world. That hasn't happened, so kudos to Apple.
It's extraordinary.